get us a picture here? Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and great to be with you, gentlemen. In the back, they said to just call them two Italians. I think I'll go with CIA Director Mike Pompeo, former CIA Director, former Secretary of Defense, and former White House Chief of Staff, Leon Panetta. Before we begin, I want to tell you that we will have questions from the audience at the end of this session, and you can ask them by going to the RNDF app, which is www.rndf2017.org. Should be on the screen there. Twitter is #RNDF, and we will take some of the questions from there at the end of this session, and we'll hear from you. So, I want to start the questions. I was told that I had carte blanche to ask anything.
Don't forget you got two Italians.
I was also told I could refuse to answer.
That's right. So let me start with this. If you were Secretary of State for the Trump administration, how would you handle... All right, no.
You know, my former friend Bret Baier.
Understanding what the president tweeted, understanding you serve at the pleasure of the president, have you had talks about another job?
Very focused on doing what I'm doing, Bret. It is in spite of what former DCIs who used to have all of the IC tell me this should be a part-time job now. It is all of that. I'm incredibly focused on it. There's lots of work to do. I have been privileged to do this for 10 months and serve with the finest espionage service in the world, and look forward to continuing to work at it.
Well, let's do a kind of an opening set the table with the state of the world. The title of this is Impacting Defense from Outside the Pentagon. Give your sense of where things stand, and then Secretary Panetta, I'll get you to weigh in as well.
Thanks, Bret, and thank you all for coming. Thanks for being here. Great to be with you, Mr. Secretary. He reminded me, I called all the then living former directors when I was nominated. He reminded me that the last time we'd met, he was a witness at the Benghazi hearing. So it's great to be with you again. Look, one of the things I get asked often, what surprised me when I became the director. I'd had some experience, as did Secretary Panetta, serving on the Oversight Committee, serving as a member of Congress. It's the incredible nexus between what we do, how we inform the Department of Defense, how we provide this sum of the parts, working alongside our DoD partners in lots of different ways. Certainly in the intelligence cycle, delivering to them information that we've garnered so that they can go perform their function, make good decisions about how to array their forces. But the cycle comes back to the DoD has lots of information that's on the ground that feeds our intelligence. And then there's places where our paramilitary forces and the DoD forces are working alongside each other, truly hand in hand. We couldn't do much of what we do in the intelligence community without an enormous commitment from Secretary Mattis and the Department of Defense, and I like to think that they depend on us as well. Secretary Panetta?
Well, I also want to thank the Reagan Library for holding this great defense forum. A lot of very distinguished speakers and a lot of great people in the audience. And I have a lot of former colleagues here, both from the CIA as well as defense, who are now using their experience to make a buck. And I understand that. That's important. I want to also pay tribute to H.R. McMaster, because I think he presented some excellent points at lunch with regards to the strategy and the things that we have to look at in today's world. We're looking at a world that, at least in my experience, I have never seen as many flashpoints in the world, probably since World War II. When you consider we're fighting a war on terrorism, we've got failed states in the Middle East. We're dealing with Iran, dealing with North Korea, dealing with Russia, dealing with China, dealing with what I call the battlefield of the future, which is cyber and the potential for a cyber attack that could paralyze this country. So there are a number of flashpoints out there. And the reality is you cannot deal with these crises without good intelligence. That's the bottom line. If you don't have good intelligence, you cannot conduct effective military operations, and you cannot implement effective diplomatic relations. You got to know what the hell you're talking about. And you have to know what you're going to see in trying to implement the mission. So intelligence is absolutely critical. We're living at a time, we lived in a time in the past where intelligence was important, but it is absolutely critical today. And also this relationship between intelligence and the military, that partnership is more important than ever. Prior to 9/11, I frankly think it was more stovepiped. Everybody kind of did their own thing. After 9/11, there was a recognition that you have to work together as a partnership. And we have built a strong partnership, and I'm sure Mike has continued that, between the intelligence and the military. Both of them have to work together. We provided intelligence on targets. The military went after those targets. We were doing counterterrorism operations in Iraq, in Afghanistan, elsewhere, and I'm sure they're continuing to do exactly the same thing. And I will tell you that probably the height, in my experience, of watching that relationship really work was on the bin Laden operation, because we put together the intelligence, we did all of the backup work, we looked at the compound, and we knew that in order to conduct that operation, we needed the military, and particularly the SEALs, to do that. And they did it based on our intelligence, and they did a great job. That is a great example of the kind of partnership that I think is absolutely going to be essential if we're going to confront these flashpoints that we're talking about.
Director Pompeo, I know you can't get specific too many places, but can you explain how the CIA is ramping up operations against terrorism?
So I inherited an organization that had been at this fight for an awfully long time, at it straight on for 15 plus years after 9/11. And the machine, the counterterrorism machine, was well in place. There's no doubt about that, thanks to the good work of lots of my predecessors. But that fight has changed in material ways. We were in front of a set of terrorists that in Syria and Iraq held a lot of real estate, which was different than what we'd seen before. And so our intelligence apparatus had to change to reflect that. So we worked to continue to build out teams that could deliver so that our partners around the world, our Department of Defense and our international partners, could continue to take down terrorists wherever we find them. It's also the case that the President made a decision to have an indefinite commitment in South Asia. That is not a permanent one, but to recommit to being there until we could bring the Taliban to the negotiating table in a way that wouldn't give them the ability to think they could win it on the battlefield. And so for us to deliver intelligence so our DoD partners can deliver that to Secretary Tillerson is incredibly important. You
mentioned Afghanistan, and obviously the President has committed more troops there, but the real pressure is to get Pakistan to move off the ball and to affect the Taliban. How do you do that effectively? Are you going to continue strikes on terrorist groups inside Pakistan? How do you move that?
Well, you begin by seeking their assistance. Secretary Mattis is actually traveling in the region here before too long and is going to make clear the President's intent. I think Secretary Mattis will deliver the message that says we would love you to do that. That is, that safe haven inside of Pakistan has worked to the detriment of our capacity to do what we needed to do in Afghanistan. And in the absence of the Pakistanis achieving that, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that that safe haven no longer exists.
Secretary Panetta, you obviously dealt with that as Director and as Secretary of Defense. I was talking to Secretary Shultz earlier, and I want to acknowledge Secretary Shultz here on the front row. It's great to have you here, sir. And he was talking about how Afghanistan is treated, as a whole country, but in reality, it's controlled, as we know, by these kind of warlords in different pockets of Afghanistan. Talk about the challenge of dealing with a place like Afghanistan. After all these years, it's the longest war that we've had in America.
Well, it's one hell of a challenge, and frankly, that's the reason we're still there and we're still fighting, because it's not easy. It's not easy. You've got, Afghanistan was the place where Al-Qaeda came together and developed the plans for 9/11. We drove into Afghanistan, and a lot of the leadership from Al-Qaeda made its way into the tribal areas in Pakistan. So we then had to take them on in Pakistan. And I think thanks to the agency that we were involved with, I think we did a hell of a job going after their leadership. But Afghanistan remains a continuing challenge for a lot of reasons. First of all, the challenge of being able to go after the Taliban effectively, and to do it in a way that not only goes after the Taliban, but ensures security once you've done the job. And the problem is we've often gone after the Taliban, and once we get out, trouble occurs, and the Taliban goes back in. And we also, we've worked with the military in Afghanistan. We work with the intelligence forces to develop their capability. I think they've gotten much better at the job that they're doing. I actually think that, they really have improved a great deal. But at the same time, they need to have U.S. support in that effort. Otherwise, if the U.S. is not there and assisting them, they're not going to do the kind of job that needs to be done. So that's why it's important that the U.S. be involved. Thirdly, it remains a country that continues to have a lot of corruption. And the central government, as a result of that corruption, doesn't have a lot of sway with the tribal leaders and the various other leaders in Afghanistan. And until they get that act together, you're going to be dealing with different tribes who have different approaches to dealing with the Taliban and with the enemy. And lastly, it's Pakistan. Pakistan has always been a problem. It's been a safe haven for terrorists who come across the border and attack in Afghanistan and then go back into Pakistan. And we have made every effort possible during the time I was there to convince Pakistan to stop it. But Pakistan, as Mike knows, Pakistan has this kind of two-edged approach to dealing with terrorism. On the one hand, yes, they don't like terrorism or the attacks from terrorists in their country. But at the same time, they don't mind using terrorists as leverage to deal with Afghanistan and to deal with India. That's the policy that they've been involved with. So Pakistan has always been a question mark. I hope that Mike and Jim Mattis are successful in making clear to the Pakistanis that they've got to be able to seal their border and they have to be able to go after the terrorists within their own territory. Unless that happens, we are going to continue to have problems in Afghanistan.
Has something changed significantly since, in recent months on that front?
Not yet.
Period. Okay. While you're so forthcoming, let's talk about North Korea. Let's talk about North Korea. We spent a lot of time talking with General McMaster about the threat from North Korea, and historically, obviously, our intelligence is not perfect in North Korea. And is there a sense, do we know how close North Korea is to mastering re-entry technology for their ICBMs?
We do have a pretty good feel for that. I can't talk a whole lot about it, other than to say, I think General McMaster said this too, they're closer. Every hour, every day that goes by, they're working diligently to achieve the capacity to hold the United States at risk. And so our intelligence on that is good. I think we have a pretty good understanding of the scope and scale of the program and how far they're making progress towards being able to reliably deliver that system against the United States.
I mean, these are ominous statements. What we heard from General McMaster, what we were hearing from other officials privately, that we are closer to some kind of military action potentially with North Korea. It's entirely possible that diplomacy doesn't work as we've seen it unfold, and that China won't or can't control Kim Jong-un. So I guess the question is America prepared militarily and politically to go to war with North Korea to protect the U.S. and our allies in the region?
Well, I mean, look, the president has been pretty clear. I wasn't sure. The president's been pretty clear about the mission statement. It is to denuclearize North Korea. He's been unambiguous about that. Our efforts are today economic and diplomatic to convince him. We in the intelligence community since Director Panetta's time, in fact, have said that Kim Jong-un is rational. But it's also the case today that we don't think he has an understanding about how tenuous his position is, domestically and internationally. That is, those around him are not feeding him the truth about the place that he finds himself, how precarious his position is in the world today. It's probably not easy to tell Kim Jong-un bad news, but
family members can attest, I think.
I have learned the art of nuance in my 10 months. Yes. So suffice it to say, we're hopeful that this diplomatic and economic pressure and that China will exert its power and will be able to resolve this in a way that doesn't require the military outcome that I know no one's excited to advance.
Secretary Panetta, I talked to a bunch of people, and there is this fear that we are getting closer. I mean, your sense of all of this?
Well, I think National Security Director was right. It's probably the most dangerous threat in a series of dangerous points in the world. It's one of the most serious threats we're facing right now. Why? Because it's pretty clear that North Korea is focused on getting that ICBM, developing that miniaturized nuclear weapon that would go on top of a ICBM. And if you look at these tests, even though, it's kind of mixed results, the bottom line is they continue to improve the flight of those ICBMs. And, they are, I think, very close to being able to develop an ICBM that can reach the United States. That's a direct threat to the security of the United States. And admittedly, as Mike's pointed out, there aren't a lot of good options here. I mean, at the Defense Department, we've developed all kinds of military options, and I'm sure that Jim Mattis has done exactly the same thing. The problem is, as pointed out today, there are risks involved. And the risk is destroying Seoul, and killing a million people in a nuclear war. And that's why, it's not easy to kind of figure out, okay, how do we do this? And you're left with, frankly, containment and deterrence, whether you like it or not. It's containment and deterrence. And that means essentially we've got to continue to strengthen our position there. We've got to continue to strengthen our military. We've got to continue to strengthen the South Koreans. I would deploy more THAADs to the South Korea. I would give them greater capabilities, the same with the Japanese. I think at the same time you have to improve the intelligence capabilities of both South Korea and Japan, as well as our capabilities as well. I don't know, Mike knows more about this, he probably can't tell you, but the reality is it's a hard target. North Korea is tough. It's not easy to get inside and try to figure out what this guy's going to do. And we've been trying to do that, and I think we've had some success at trying to penetrate it. But it's tough, so we need to constantly improve our intelligence. We need to continue to squeeze on the sanctions, and we continue to put pressure on China to try to convince North Korea to come to the negotiating table. Those are the levers we've got right now, and we have to keep pushing. I do think one of the most important things we have to do is we have to develop a missile shield, an effective missile shield, not only using South Korea and Japan, but obviously our own capabilities, so that these missiles that take off, we have the capability to hit them quickly and make sure that we can do an effective job. I think at some point they have to pay a price for this kind of constant testing that they're involved with. And the only way we're going to do that is if we improve our missile capability, which I think is absolutely essential to our ability to protect our own security.
You're speaking to a home crowd. Missile defense in the Reagan Library is pretty good.
A long history, yes.
Yes.
Bret, may I add one more thing? I think Secretary Panetta is right about this idea. But we shouldn't forget that this is not only a nuclear power, but an enormous conventional power as well.
Yeah.
And so to the extent Kim Jong-un gains the capability to hold America at risk, it may be the case that he not only uses that as a shield, that is, we often talk about his imperative to be maintenance of the regime. But when he has that capacity, he might well use that in a way that was offensive, that is, use that nuclear umbrella as a conventional sword. That is, to attack other places, to gain control, to exert greater influence. And so it's not simply the threat of the use of nuclear weapons that we must deter, but we must deter Kim Jong-un's capability to use any nuclear capacity he has to further other things besides just protection of the regime that he might well have on his mind.
You know, I asked General McMaster this, but in this environment, is it okay to go to the Olympics?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Just have to run fast. That's
all right. Let's turn to Iran. In Congress, you were one of the congressmen who spoke out about Iran a lot and all the things that they were doing beyond just the nuclear deal, but their support of terrorism around the region. If President Trump asked you today, is Iran in full technical compliance with the Iran deal, what would you tell him?
I would tell him that the intelligence that we've seen to date indicates that they are in substantial compliance with the nuclear provisions of that agreement. Indeed, I have told him that. And
as far as the other things Iran's doing, not part of that deal, it has only increased in your eyes?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. The expanded efforts, I mean, you need only look to the past few weeks and the efforts of the Iranians to exert influence now in northern Iraq, in addition to other places in Iraq, to see that Iranians' effort to be the hegemonic power throughout the Middle East continues to increase. Indeed, there was a news story. It didn't get a lot of attention here. It got a lot in Iran. I'd sent a note to Qasem Soleimani. I sent it because he had indicated that forces under his control might, in fact, threaten U.S. interests in Iraq that are serving
Soleimani, by the way, the head of the
Iran
Revolutionary
Quds
Guard,
Force, the Quds Force. His commander has also indicated an increased willingness to potentially attack U.S. forces that are in Iraq with the consent of the Iraqi government. He refused to open the letter. Didn't break my heart, to be honest with you. What we were communicating to him in that letter was that we will hold he and Iran accountable for any attacks on American interests in Iraq by forces that are under their control. And we wanted to make sure he and the leadership in Iran understood that in a way that was crystal clear. We're there on an important mission on behalf of the Iraqi government, and we intend to stay there so long as the Iraqi government wants us there to continue to perform that important mission.
But yet, when dealing in the region like that, doesn't the situation in Syria, working with Russia, which essentially is providing cover for Iran, make it more complicated? It seems like three-dimensional chess here. You move one piece, and there's three other pieces moving.
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave some of the policy issues to others, but yes, it's incredibly complicated. From an intelligence perspective, what we want to ensure that we can continue to do is to be in the places that we need to be so that there is an understanding of the Russians' intentions, Iranian intentions, Syrian regime intentions, opposition forces' intentions, the Kurdish intentions inside of the SDF and other places. We want to make sure we can deliver for the President and Secretary Madison Tillerson the information they need so that they can resolve this issue in a way that benefits America.
Secretary Panetta, this is one of the biggest changes in a geopolitical sense between administrations. The Obama administration's focus and central focus on Iran in its foreign policy, and this administration's focus on the Gulf states and a different position on Iran. You want to comment on that?
Well, I think, as Mike's pointed out, they are abiding by the nuclear agreement, and I think that's pretty much recognized. And look, I had serious concerns about that agreement, and I'm sure Mike and obviously the President had serious concerns about that agreement. But the reality is that if they're abiding by it, at least with regards to the issue of developing a nuclear weapon, that's something we ought to continue to focus on to ensure that we are enforcing that and that they are abiding by it. I think that's absolutely essential. At the same time, we do have to address these other areas, and I think it is important that we put pressure, and we continue to put pressure on Iran with regards to their support for terrorism, with regards to their missile development, with regards to their undermining of regimes throughout the Middle East. I think they're involved in developing an axis of influence in the Middle East. from Lebanon to Damascus and Syria to Iraq. And I'm glad that Mike, and the intelligence forces, I'm sure, are on top of this. But I talked to a former leader in Iraq the other day, and the one thing he expressed real concerns about is that, we've been successful, obviously, in going in and defeating ISIS and being able to go after the caliphate. But what happens is that if we begin to reduce our presence in Iraq, we went through this before, if we reduce our presence there, Iran will take advantage of it, and they already are. And this individual said, wherever you go, you see Iranian forces trying to play a role in Iran. And I think it raises a lot of concerns for the United States to make sure that doesn't happen. Iran wants to be a nation, even for all of their divisions, their tribal differences, which we've been through. The reality is they want to have a nation. But in order to have a nation, we've got to be able to be there, to support them, and to try to make sure that they develop the kind of parliamentary and governmental approach that allows each of the segments, whether it's Sunni, whether it's Kurds, whether it's Shia, to participate in the government. That's the only way Iraq eventually is going to be able to find security.
Two other thoughts, Bret, on Iran and intelligence. One, with respect to the JCPOA, right? We always don't know what we don't know. And so you asked, are they in substantial compliance with the JCPOA?
The Iran nuclear deal.
The Iran nuclear deal. We always don't know what we don't know. We do our level best to deliver that intelligence to the community. And the related issue, as an example, 40-plus missiles and rockets fired from Yemen into Saudi Arabia or towards the Emiratis. It's remarkable to see how the Iranian PR machine hasn't been held accountable for the fact, had they done that at any place else, another nation state, had a third party come in and provide assistance, technical and otherwise, to another country and then fire rockets, putting them at risk. This is classic terrorism, and the president has directed very clearly that we're going to work to deliver the intelligence so that we can push back against that.
You mentioned Saudi Arabia, and we are likely going to see a new king there very soon. The Crown Prince has taken control of a lot of different decision-making, and it's changing the dynamic. Can I get your thoughts about where the kingdom stands and what it looks like in the region?
Sure. A big question. I'm trying to figure out where to put my pick in to begin. So some of the transformation that you're seeing take place in Saudi Arabia are the kinds of things that America has been asking Saudi Arabia to do for decades, and they're now beginning to do it, and we should applaud that, we should encourage it, we should support it. They also have been prepared to work alongside our Gulf partners. We've seen them work with the Israelis to push back against terrorism throughout the Middle East. To the extent we can continue to develop those relationships and work alongside them, the Gulf states and the broader Middle East will likely be far more secure than in the absence of that.
Secretary Panetta?
No, I think that's correct. Saudi Arabia, we've been asking them for a long time to deal with the issues that the Crown Prince is trying to deal with in terms of developing a diversified economy, in terms of trying to control corruption within the Saudi society, trying to basically build a strong nation from the inside. Whether his tactics are the right tactics remains to be seen, but I think his objectives are probably the right one. But it is important. Saudi Arabia is a key player. And I think, I mentioned this to Mike before we came on, that it's incredibly important that in the Middle East, where we have failed states, where you have ISIS, where you have Iran, that we've got to develop a stronger coalition of countries that are willing to work together to confront these challenges. The United States can't do it on our own. Obviously, the Saudis can't do it on their own. These other countries can't do it on their own. But together in some kind of coalition of countries, of Arab countries, working with the United States, working with Israel, working with Turkey, to build a strong coalition that can operate, I think, frankly, with a joint military headquarters that can target, the the terrorists in that region that can basically work together to try to provide stability where it's necessary in these countries. I mean, you know, the Arab Spring produced a lot of convulsion there. We never developed a formula for how we achieve stability in that region. The United States can't do it, but certainly the Arab countries that are there have a better sense of how you work to establish stability. So I think the development of a strong coalition to deal with the challenge from Iran and to deal with the challenge in dealing with ISIS and al-Qaeda is extremely important, and the Saudis, very frankly, are incredibly important to that ability to have that kind of coalition.
Director Pompeo, you mentioned President Trump and delivering intelligence to him. You and I have talked before about how you do that. I'm wondering if you could share that, how you deliver the intelligence and how the president receives it and kind of his interaction.
Sure. So when I'm in Washington and the president's there, I deliver the intelligence briefing to him nearly every day. Different presidents, I've become an amateur historian about how presidents receive their intelligence. Different presidents have chosen to do it very differently. Indeed, some presidents have chosen to do it one way at the beginning and have changed over time. I come in, I bring one of my officers with me. The vice president is there nearly every day. General McMaster is there every day. Director Coates is often there as well. That's the team. We deliver him the set of things he needs to know that happened overnight, a set of things that we think are important to him to know in the weeks ahead if he's traveling or he's got someone coming to visit that we need to make sure he's fully briefed on. And then we use a portion of that time to share with him things that we believe are strategically important so that we can begin to plan our intelligent laydown for the months and years ahead. We have half hour, 40 minutes every day. He asks lots of hard questions, as any good intelligence consumer would.
He's engaged.
And he's very engaged and very appreciative of the information that we deliver to him. He, in turn, I have seen him time and time again rely on the information that we've provided him to inform his decisions.
So when you hear these stories or see these stories that he's losing it or that he's not with it or that he's totally checked out, what do you think?
It's absurd. I mean, here, I'll put it in Washington terms. It's demonstrably false. I'm a Kansas boy. I think absurd. I mean, look, it's not the reality of the experience. My experience is that I'm literally with him. The team is with him. We're working hard. He gives us instructions. We take them back. We try and provide the information that he and Secretary Mattis and Secretary Tillerson need. He's incredibly engaged. We've taught him things. He was a New York real estate guy when he came in, right? So he hadn't spent a lot of time staring at these things. He's taught us a lot of things, too, at the intelligence community, how to think about economic ideas and make sure we consider who's got the money and how that will impact these decisions across the world. That's precisely the way intelligence agencies ought to deliver and how intelligence consumers ought to interact with the intelligence community from my perspective.
Just to be clear, it's a back and forth. I mean, it's
absolutely.
Almost every day.
Almost every day.
Secretary Panetta, you were on television recently after the president retweeted those videos, and you said that retweeting the Muslim videos was like playing with fire. Talk about that.
Well, it is dangerous. It's a dangerous thing to do, and I'll go into this. By the way, God bless Mike Pompeo for the ability to sit down and brief the president and have the president listen to the intelligence reports. That is damn important. And I was a little worried about that at the beginning. But if Mike is doing that and the president's engaged, that is extremely important to the president being able to do the job. The president cannot operate without intelligence. He's got to know what's going on in the world. And so thank you for the ability to have developed an approach that obviously is one that's working, and I appreciate that. The problem of dealing, of suddenly tweeting an anti-Muslim video like that is that once it goes out, what it does is it inflames the people that are out there. And we had very much the same kind of experience in the time that I was there when there was Koran burnings that took place that made their way to video. And when those Koran burnings go out in a video, it resulted in several demonstrations taking place at various embassies. And the problem is that lives can be jeopardized. So I just think it's really important that the president understand. And I'm not sure he fully understood maybe the implications of what he was doing. But it is clear that it's not something he should do, because when you do that, when you tweet something like that out there, you don't know what the consequences are going to be. And the consequences could involve lives. So better not to do that. And I hope he'll refrain from doing that in the future.
Twitter makes your job harder.
We use Twitter for lots of things in the intelligence community. There are days we have good days, and there's days that we use it in ways. I mean, right? Social media more broadly. Go ahead.
Rephrase.
I know what question you're going to ask.
One account on Twitter makes your job harder.
Oh, I don't know that that's the case. I've actually seen it help us. I have seen things the president has put on his Twitter account actually have a real-world impact on our capacity to understand what's going on in other places of the world. That is, our adversaries responded to those tweets in ways that were helpful to us to understand command and control issues, who's listening to what messages, how those messages are resonating around the world. My son knows my views on social media. It is not an unambiguous good. And maybe that's enough.
But you want to, yeah, sure. How about just react to Secretary Panetta about the specific, the playing fire?
I don't have much to add. The president, in my experience, when we talk with the president about the threats from radical Islamic terrorism, understands that it is incredibly important that we address the malign behavior in a way that reflects on opportunities to make Americans safer. End of story.
Go ahead.
Let me comment on the tweeting thing, and obviously this will be different than Mike's view. As a former chief of staff, I cannot imagine what it's like to serve a president who tweets in the morning. The whole purpose of the White House is to develop some discipline in terms of messaging, in terms of policy, in terms of everybody being on the same page when you get up and everybody knows what the president's going to be doing, what the message of the day is going to be, and everybody is coordinated. And when you wake up in the morning, if you're chief of staff and you suddenly got a bunch of tweets out there that are raising all kinds of hell in different areas, it's very upsetting to the operation. You got to then figure out, how do I deal with that stuff? And it diverts you. Look, I know the president, loves to tweet. I mean, frankly, if I had my way, I'd take that tweeter and throw it out the window. But I understand he likes to tweet. But in the very least, if he's going to tweet, he ought to at least have some policy process to develop, what are the policies you want to advance, and then let him tweet the hell out of it. But at least there's a policy process involved. You aren't doing this by the seat of your pants. And even, for example, on this video, if there's just a check system where he says, I want to tweet this, this Muslim video out, what do you think, John Kelly? What do you think, Mike Pompeo? And, they'd raise the concerns. At least if you had some kind of check on the process, we'd be a hell of a lot better off. So I express the concern of how do you develop discipline, chain of command, a rational policy process in the White House when you've got somebody who loves to tweet, gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and says whatever the hell he wants to say. It just raises a little bit of concern about stability.
Yeah, Leon's correct. We do have a different view.
I'm sure.
We probably spent too long on this already.
All right. Sorry, I opened the door.
Well, you did. One last thought. I think Secretary Bret correctly said that the world is more dangerous today. We have more flashpoints. Those all pre-existed January 20th of this year. So message discipline, as you referred to it, got us to those places. I'll leave it with that. Right? I mean, What I mean by say by that is we should not over-attribute the place we find ourselves in the world today to things that may or may not have as much impact as folks like to suggest sometimes.
Well, I think a lot of Republican presidents I know exercised a lot of message discipline.
Yeah,
wasn't so bad.
This wasn't meant in a partisan way at all. Where we find ourselves today is the trajectory of post-World War II conflict, or you can say post-9/11 conflict. We found ourselves, these were Republican and Democrat presidents alike. This isn't partisan in any sense whatsoever.
Well, no, I understand what you're saying, Mike, and I understand the president's motives in doing that. But it needs to be tied to a strategy. You just don't roll a grenade in the room, have things blow up, and then not have a strategy for how the hell you deal with it.
Moving on, we have... Let me get to a process question about something that both of you have dealt with. The Osama bin Laden raid under the Obama administration led to what was called at the time a treasure trove of documents. The last day of the Obama administration, January 19th, the DNI released a statement saying that it had released all relevant documents captured during the bin Laden raid, and that total was 571. Director Pompeo, last month you released an additional 470,000 documents recovered in that raid. Among many others, bin Laden's 255-page handwritten journal of jihad, describing how he was much more engaged in all of these satellite terrorist groups. My question to you first is why do you think the statement was made that was it, 571 documents?
I wouldn't care to speculate, to be honest with you. I'll leave to the previous administration to explain the decision that they made about what to release.
And why did you put them out?
Not to. I put them out there because I'm doing my darndest to be as transparent as I can wherever we find an opportunity to do so in a way that doesn't present risk to American lives or improves the chances for America to be secure. In this case, we'd reviewed these documents. We felt like that there might be some learning that could take place if they were released, and that the risk to American national security interests was very, very low. So we did what good government people do, and we released these documents for the public to evaluate and form their own judgments.
Have you discovered things?
So we had done our work, and I can't say much about what we'd found, but you can go read the public press and see what others have found.
All right, so Secretary Panetta, during the re-election campaign in 2012, President Obama repeatedly said that al-Qaeda was on the run. John Brennan said in April that al-Qaeda would see its demise before 2020. But today we have a rejuvenated al-Qaeda. The group its affiliates control more territory. Even though ISIS has taken a hit, al-Qaeda is still strong. So do you think the Obama administration, President Obama, underestimated al-Qaeda jihadists more broadly because of ideological thinking at the time?
Well, look, terrorism is a challenge to deal with because it metastasizes. I mean, we're dealing with an enemy that is able to be resilient, to make adjustments, to go from al-Qaeda to al-Nusra to ISIS and to other forms. Boko Haram, al-Shabaab. There are a lot of elements. But you have to target the ones that you can go after and do an effective job in doing that. And we did. I mean, the time I was there as director and as secretary, we went after the leadership of al-Qaeda, particularly in Pakistan. And we decapitated their leadership, particularly with the bin Laden raid. And I think we did a good job. And we interrupted a lot of their planning for attacks as a result. But the reality is al-Qaeda then, developed in Yemen, ISIS developed, etc. And, you have to continue the effort in these other areas. You've got to be able to target the different forms of terrorism that are developing. I think I think the Obama administration in the last few years began to recognize that they couldn't just ignore what was happening, and so counterterrorism capabilities began to be established not only in Yemen, but in North Africa and other places, to try to make sure that they try to take on what happened here. But the reality is that if you don't stick to it, if you suddenly declare victory, which I think nobody should do when it comes to terrorism, but that you commit yourself to going after each of these elements, as different as they are, that's the only way ultimately we're going to be able to win at terrorism. It's going to take a long time. This is not going to happen overnight. We've learned, there have been mistakes made. We've learned a lot from those mistakes. I think the administration, frankly, on dealing with ISIS has really done a great job at going after ISIS and the caliphate. I think the real question is going to be, can we go after Boko Haram? Can we go after al-Shabaab? Can we go after other elements of al-Qaeda and continue to do an effective job? It's going to be a challenge, and it's going to require resources. And I think the biggest concern, that's been registered here at this forum, is going to be the issue of whether or not we have sufficient resources to provide the kind of counterterrorism capabilities that we're going to need in order to defeat terrorism.
Just last question on this. 2 weeks ago, Rukmini Callimachi, the New York Times lead terrorism reporter, suggested that the Obama administration downplayed intelligence of the threat from al-Qaeda. You think she's right?
That certainly wasn't true when I was there. What happened after I left, who knows? But when I was there and we presented evidence about the threat from al-Qaeda and the ability to go after those targets, the president supported that effort and supported our operations.
Secretary Panetta mentioned Africa. We are obviously engaged in Africa militarily. I assume we're doing things on the intelligence side too. Can you talk about the threat in Africa broadly and what you're seeing there from different groups?
So there is a history of terrorism there. Would have been under Director and Secretary Panetta's time as well, and they did good work. I too, we can't say enough about the amazing work that the CIA under Director Panetta's leadership did to decapitate al-Qaeda leadership. It was remarkable. Many of those officers still work for me today, and America is benefiting from their good work. Africa is the same way. It is a constant challenge. It is changing because as the caliphate has been largely defeated, there is great risk that the ISIS and others will use platforms in Niger and Somalia and Libya to continue to foment terrorism that puts America at risk, which is what the president constantly asks us to look at. That is, we're interested in terror all places. We are most interested in that terror which presents an external threat from those places coming to the homeland. And Africa is no different in the sense that it presents that risk to us today. And as ISIS makes version 3.0 or 4.0, Africa is certainly one of the places, in addition to Mindanao and South Asia, that we figure we'll find them.
Get your questions ready. A few more minutes. Secretary Panetta, I've heard you talk about the threat from cyber and what's evolving in the world. I'd like to have both of you address that and kind of talk to the American people about what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think we tend to underestimate, the threat from cyber. And I don't know whether it's because we're wrapped up in our cell phones or wrapped up in our computers. And, I don't really think that somehow it can be used as a weapon, but it can be used as a weapon, and very effectively. We've seen what's happened with cyber on interrupting services. We've seen what cyber can do in stealing intellectual property. We've seen what cyber can do in hacking and stealing personal information. But the reality is cyber can be used to destroy. Iran developed something called the Shamoon virus, which they deployed against Aramco oil in Saudi Arabia. 30,000 computers were shut down, destroyed. You take that same kind of virus, you apply it on our computers that run our grids, our electric grid system, or our financial system, or our government systems, or our chemical systems, or our water system, or our transportation systems. You can paralyze this country. You don't have to send a B-2 bomber. You don't have to send an F-16. You don't have to send boots on the ground. You can sit at a computer someplace and deploy a virus. That's the kind of threat we're living under. And it's extremely important that we wake up to that threat, develop the defenses that are necessary to confront that, and frankly, develop the offensive system as well, in order to make sure that we go after an enemy that is trying to target us on a cyber capability.
Without getting into the classified, can you quantify the cyber threat numbers or cyber threat day-to-day?
No, I can't. I don't know how to quantify it necessarily, Brett. I can say that it is becoming more rampant because it is becoming increasingly cheap. That is, the cost to conduct those kinds of attacks, the cost of that has been greatly reduced. I think Secretary Panetta described it pretty well. I always think about actors, right? So there's one thing to talk about the tool, cyber. Another thing is these cyber actors. One of the things that has increasingly presented a threat that wasn't as rampant as when Leon was the director is we now are not only facing this cyber threat from nation states, but from non-nation states as well. The cyber capability of ISIS, the cyber capability of Al-Qaeda, groups like WikiLeaks and others present real threats to America, and the intelligence community has traditionally focused itself on state actors. That is, our capacity to infiltrate others' intelligence agencies and take down their networks was often based on a nation-state model that no longer applies in the world. Individuals, small groups can do lots of damage using this tool in the way that only nation-states could do damage 15 or 25 years ago.
So cyber, North Korea, radical Islamic terrorism.
That's my day.
That's Tuesday.
That's Tuesday.
Of those three, do you rank them?
I don't care to rank them. They're three number ones. Yeah.
That's why at the end of the day, I always had a good scotch.
Water. On the cyber threat, and obviously there's been a lot of focus on that in reaction to the election, is the U.S. doing enough to counter Russian meddling and disinformation in Europe, around the world? Is the U.S. doing enough?
Yeah. The enough question is always no. There's a great deal more that we can do. That threat is real. If I talk to my European counterparts every week, it is Russia, Russia, Russia. They're worried about information warfare, active measures, call it what you will. They're worried about their increased physical interference as well. So these threats are very real. We have made a lot of progress assisting them in protecting elections that have taken place. Even in my 10 months, we've done some really good work alongside them. So you not only have Russian information warfare, but lots of others. It's not just Russia engaged in active measures against Western democracies around the world.
Secretary Panetta?
Yeah, listen, we are in the era of hybrid war, and the ability to use cyber as part and parcel of your effort to destabilize other countries is becoming not only more effective, it's becoming the kind of tool of preference now, because it's a way to do it that doesn't necessarily cost lives, but can be very disrupting. And so it is incredibly important that, having been attacked the way we were, that we develop defenses to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and that we work with other countries to develop defenses in their country. Because the Russians are going to do this. Make no mistake about it. They saw what they did here. They're going to continue to do it in Catalonia and elsewhere. Wherever there's elections, they will try to influence elections by virtue of being able to use cyber. And so we are going to have to join with our allies to really develop effective ways of making sure that doesn't happen.
Before I get to these questions, I just want to get both of you to kind of weigh in on the CIA and working with the men and women there. Maybe something that we don't know about, that interaction and kind of characterize it.
CIA.gov is where you go to apply. We are always looking for talented young men and women who want to come be part of the finest espionage service the world has ever known. I say that half jokingly about applying. We're looking for the next set of people who want to come devote their life to national security in a clandestine space. We'll give you great mission, enormous opportunity to excel. The men and women who work there are patriots at the most extraordinary level. They come to work every day. The political noise is something they just put off to the side so that they can deliver the truth to U.S. policymakers each and every day. It has been an incredible privilege.
I think I couldn't concur more. The American people have to understand that these are really professionals that work at the CIA. They're not Democrats, they're not Republicans, they're good Americans that have a job to do, and they do it. It was really, for me, one of the more satisfying experiences in government to be able to work at the CIA, because they know what their job's about and they do it. And the President of the United States is the one who says what you do and what you don't do. But once he says you do it, you do it. And you can do it with the CIA. It's a self-contained operation. I call it the Marine Corps of the intelligence force.
I think of it as the Army of the intelligence service. Fair enough.
That too.
You could put that to music and make it an ad for employment there. Okay, a couple of questions here from folks writing in. Are we going to supply the Syrian Kurds, Syrian Democratic Forces, with arms and assistance or not? If we continue to throw our allies under the bus when we're done with them, how are we going to continue operating successfully in the Middle East?
Yeah, I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to talk about that. Yeah.
Okay, we're 0 for 1.
Other than to say that I concur, throwing allies under the bus is bad form. Yes, I concur. We should always support our allies. We should always count on them to support us as well. So that wasn't the predicate of the question, but I'll take that as absolutely no bus throwing.
All right, let's try this one. Should the CIA take offensive action against hostile nations as a means to avoid war?
Well, we should use all elements of the United States power to do everything we can to achieve American objectives, and we should always do it in a way that diminishes any risk to Americans, whether those are Americans in the homeland or brave men and women who are part of our United States military. The CIA is certainly part of that. Our primary function is to do that by collecting foreign intelligence and delivering that to policymakers so that they can make informed decisions to achieve that objective. And then when the president asks us to, we conduct covert actions around the world in furtherance of those same set of policies.
Secretary Panetta.
Hey, Director of the CIA, President of the United States, Secretary of Defense, with their primary mission is to protect this country and to protect the American people. That's what it's about. And if you get intelligence that somebody is threatening this country and you've got confirmed intelligence that that's going to happen, you don't just sit back and wait for it to happen. You have an obligation to try to take steps to make sure that it doesn't happen. So I think in order to protect this country, you've got to not only have a good defense, but you better damn well have a good offense.
Does the U.S. intelligence community have an interrogation program? Can you describe it?
So the CIA performs its functions. I maybe missed a chance when you asked me about the CIA and our officers. I've seen the movies. You all have seen the movies. They're fantastic movies. Most of them are fiction. But we operate under the rule of law. Everything we do. I run a pretty good-sized law firm. You would agree, Secretary Panetta.
Too many lawyers.
Too many. You said too many, not me. Just let the record reflect. We operate under the rule of law, and that's central. If we don't do that, we'll lose the American people's trust. It's absolutely our duty to comply with the rules that have been laid down by Congress and guidance that is provided to us by the President of the United States. That we do that. We will always do that. You asked the question. I'm going to try to answer the question. We go out and ask lots of people lots of things. That's the tradecraft that we teach our officers when they come on duty. So yes, we're out asking questions, but the question implies something far more sinister, and that I can unequivocally say is not true. There's nothing sinister. We are complying with the rule of law and doing our best to do so each and every day.
Okay. As former representatives and or executive cabinet members, and of course a position in the intelligence agencies, do the President's past comments on the credibility of the intelligence community encourage our adversaries? Secretary Panetta.
Me?
It wasn't addressed, but I figured it was your turn.
I thought you were on a roll. Look, I think it's very important that President of the United States is supportive of the intelligence services. The intelligence services are critical to providing intelligence, information that a president needs. And that's what they do. They're dedicated to doing that. And it's important, I think, for the President of the United States to be supportive of that effort. And look, I think the President started off on the wrong foot, criticizing our intelligence agencies. And I think that sent the wrong signal, not only to our intelligence agencies, but to our allies. But I think he's come back, and I think Mike deserves a lot of credit for the fact that I think the President now clearly does respect the work that our intelligence services does. So I hope he'll continue to be supportive of them.
I'll just add this. I'm an engineer by training. I'm a facts and data guy. I've read the stories. Facts and data. We get every opportunity. Whenever I call the President and say, I've got some intelligence I need to deliver to you, he takes the intelligence, he asks good questions, and we give him the truth as best we know it. We have asked him repeatedly for increased authorities, that is to go out and perform our function in ways that are more robust, frankly taking more risk. In each and every case, the President has provided that to us. We have asked for some increased resources, a little bit of its money, a little bit of its other resources. Every time the President says, you bet, I'm in full support of you. So you all read, write, whatever the heck you want. The President's relationship with not only the CIA, but other elements of the intelligence community, as evidenced by the facts, is unequivocally supportive.
It's been reported that the breach of intelligence software and various digital espionage tools has been devastating to the intelligence community, or at least to large segments of it. Are those assessments accurate?
I won't comment about any particular data set, but I will say this. One of the things that I saw as a member of Congress, and one of the things I have put an enormous amount of my personal attention to, is counterintelligence. I never miss an opportunity when I'm with my officers to tell them the last thing we can tolerate is to have a secret that we stole restolen. It is simply unacceptable. It is our duty to protect them. It is our duty to go after those who stole them and to prosecute them within the bounds of the law in every way that we can. I've given only 2 sets of formal remarks. One of them was about this very issue of our duty to protect our information. We have to do it to protect our officers, their families, and American national security. I sometimes hear comments from WikiLeaks and Mr. Assange thinking that those who have provided him classified information are safe and secure. He ought to be a bit less confident about that, because we're going to go figure out how to make sure we protect this information. We owe it to the American people, and our officers are dedicated to it.
And just to be clear, WikiLeaks is a national security threat in your eyes?
Yes. Yep. I mean, you need go no further than the release of documents by Manning to see what the risk that it presents to the United States of America.
But Mike, I'm sure can't go into all the particulars, but let me tell you how damaging it is when you get somebody that reveals secrets that indicate the kind of methods that are used in order to get information. You're basically telling the enemy how you get information, and you're exposing, our spies. You're exposing our assets. You're exposing our methods. And the result is that you have to start from scratch. You got to rebuild it. And sometimes it's not that easy. So the people that reveal these secrets, believe me, are not heroes. They are traitors.
Amen.
2 more, and we'll wrap up. Is Iran today supporting al-Qaeda? Would you assess that this support has increased or decreased in the past year?
Here's what I can say. I can say that it's a complex relationship between al-Qaeda and Tehran. And one ought not think about Iran as being a unitary actor here. There are multiple power centers inside of Iran. There's Qasem and his gang, there's Rouhani and his team, and there's the supreme leader. One ought to think about the complexity of that and who might be working more closely with al-Qaeda than not. You referred to some documents that we released. They showed this complex relationship. They showed very clear support from Iran for al-Qaeda. And there's no reason to think that when opportunity strikes, that is, they have a chance to inflict harm on the great state in the United States of America, that Iran and al-Qaeda won't hesitate for a second to work against us jointly.
Are they working with North Korea?
I'd just rather not say much. Former director's question right there.
Are they working with North Korea?
I'm with Mike.
Well, we have been pretty lucky with a lot of the questions, so I'm going to give you a final chance to wrap things up in this great defense forum at the Reagan Library, and final thoughts as you get back to go to your day job. And that Tuesday sounded tough.
I just say this. First of all, it's been Secretary Panetta was one of the first phone calls I made. Leon, you have been so generous with your time. I've called him repeatedly to ask him how to think about things, how to solve problems. Frankly, nearly all the former directors have just been incredibly generous and have helped me be better. It didn't matter if they worked for a Democrat president or Republican president. The mission to keep America safe is one that Leon and I and the team that I serve hold in our hearts and will forever. It's been an incredible honor to get to be a part of that and to work alongside colleagues who are aimed at delivering for the president and keeping America safe. And thanks for inviting me to the conference here today. It's pretty cool. I'm not far. I grew up not far from here, and it's pretty neat to be back in my home.
Secretary Panetta.
It's going to be a requirement that Italians always run the CIA.
Amen. Sign me up.
A vowel at the end of the name. That's a requirement.
Let me express my thanks to, again, the Reagan Library and to all of those associated with this defense forum. I think we have to understand that the responsibility that all of us have, it's not just the president, it's not just Mike, but the responsibility that all of us have is to protect our country and to protect the security of this country. And it's not easy now. One of my gripes, very frankly, is that we're dealing with a dysfunctional Washington and certainly a dysfunctional Congress in terms of their ability to kind of work together and be able to get things done. And that doesn't make it any easier. And in many ways, frankly, it impacts on our national security. If Republicans and Democrats aren't working together to deal with the major problems facing this country, it impacts on our security. So this is a moment in time where this kind of defense forum has to convey a real important message that we have a responsibility to work together to make sure that we protect this great country of ours. We have a great defense force, we have a great intelligence capability, but it isn't worth a damn unless the American people are working together to support what they do. So thank you for your service, and thank all of you for attending.
Let me end where I began, and just with the fact that Secretary Panetta is the last person to go from CIA Director to Secretary. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you all. I appreciate it.